original story of Pinocchio, the talking cricket was a minor character. The best way to describe him is to imagine that guy who's always telling you what you did wrong. Didn't you just want to kill him? Well, that's what Pinocchio did. But don't worry, he comes back as a ghost, then as a doctor, then finally at the end, where he's alive. He acts like he got injured by the hammer, even though it's made clear he's dead. The book was pretty weird. Anyway, the talking cricket was not a particularly interesting character. A lot of adaptations of Pinocchio don't include him. At one point during production, the Disney staff considered going this route. Lucky for us, the Disney staff chose to give him a bigger role, and give him the name Jiminy Cricket. It's lost on most people today, but at the time, his name was a joke. Back in the 1930s, Jiminy Cricket was a euphemism for Jesus Christ. That's why we hear the dwarves in Snow White, and that one character in The Brave Little Tailor, say it. For years, I thought they were talking about the character. Anyway, Jiminy Cricket is a much more interesting character than his literary counterpart. When we first meet Jiminy, his clothes are all torn, suggesting that he's down on his luck. Something that many in the audience could relate to, given that the Great Depression was still going on at the time. Most likely, Jiminy often goes from one house to the other, sort of like how some people went from city to city looking for work. Despite his circumstance, Jiminy is not unpleasant. He's always smiling, and he's fascinated with a puppet that Geppetto is working on. Jiminy probably has been poor for years, and just learned to accept it, rather than dwell on what could have been. It is because of his circumstance that Jiminy doesn't believe in wishes coming true. When he overhears Geppetto wishing Pinocchio was real, Jiminy remarks that it's a lovely thought, but not at all practical. It's interesting that he doesn't make fun of Geppetto for making the wish. Maybe deep down he wants to believe it. He's given a reason to believe when the blue fairy shows up to grant Geppetto's wish. Jiminy knows firsthand that it won't be easy for Pinocchio to prove himself brave, truthful, and unselfish. At first, Jiminy seemed content to just observe what is going on, until Pinocchio asked, "What's a conscience?" Why is this the moment he chooses to reveal himself? I tend to think Jiminy has a strong sense of what's right and wrong. It angers him when he sees people doing something wrong. We see this at the Pleasure Island scene when he catches Pinocchio and Lampwick misbehaving. At first, Jiminy just wanted to rant about how people don't listen to their conscience. Then something unexpected happened. Pinocchio asked, "Are you my conscience?" This moment is what separates Jiminy from the talking cricket in the book. The talking cricket would have just went on his rant, then quietly leave, or get killed. Jiminy is being asked to help Pinocchio learn the difference between right and wrong. It's easy to rant about the problems of the world. It's much harder to do something about it. After accepting the job, Jiminy is given a new set of clothes, probably the first he had in years. He then asks the blue fairy if he gets a gold badge. All she says is, "We'll see." Jiminy's new clothes is similar to Pinocchio coming to life. Both were gifts from the blue fairy that didn't require the characters to prove anything. The badge in becoming a real boy, on the other hand, only to be rewarded once they prove themselves. So Jiminy is being tested just as much as Pinocchio. Of course we all know that Pinocchio becomes a real boy, and Jiminy gets his badge by the end of the movie. There's no question that Pinocchio deserves to be a real boy. But does Jiminy deserve his badge? Some argue no. These people point to the fact that Pinocchio falls prey to Honest John, and later going off to Pleasure Island, as examples of Jiminy's failure as a conscience. Do they really prove that? No. And here's why. Jiminy is not a priest, minister, rabbi, professor, or a teacher. He was a tramp who now has to be a conscience. He's new on the job, and like most of us, he's going to make mistakes. His first one is how he tried to explain temptation to Pinocchio. It's obvious he knows what it is, but is unsure how to explain it. I know what temptation is, and even I found his explanation confusing. He does, however, succeed at inspiring Pinocchio to do good, so that's something. As for falling prey to Honest John, Jiminy wasn't present when Pinocchio first encountered him. He had overslept that morning. You might be thinking to yourself, this proves Jiminy is a failure as a conscience. If he had been there, Pinocchio wouldn't have ended up in Stromboli's cage. To this I reply that it only proves that Jiminy isn't perfect. Being late on the first day of the job does look bad, but it doesn't really mean that you are bad at your job. It only means you gotta learn to be on time. Once Jiminy sees what's going on, he immediately takes action. He stops them from going any further and takes Pinocchio aside to have a conversation. He knows Honest John is bad news and tells that to Pinocchio. He also tells him he should decline Honest John's offer to become an actor because school is important. Pinocchio chooses not to listen to Jiminy. This shows that even if Jiminy had been there when Pinocchio first met Honest John, Pinocchio most likely would have made the same decision. Jiminy's job is to teach Pinocchio the difference between right and wrong. That's just what he did. He told Pinocchio that going to school is right, and going with Honest John is wrong. What he can't do is make the right decision for Pinocchio. To anyone who thinks this reflects poorly on Jiminy, I would like to ask you a question. Did you always listen to your elders? Jiminy is disgusted with what Pinocchio did at first, until he sees the audience loved the show. He starts to wonder if he was wrong about the life of an actor. We all have moments of self-doubt, and this is what Jiminy is experiencing. This led him to basically quit his job as Pinocchio's conscience. This is the biggest mistake Jiminy makes. He thinks Pinocchio doesn't need him because, to use his own words, what would an actor want with a conscience anyway? Believe me, Jiminy, plenty of actors could have used you for a conscience. The thing is, Jiminy didn't go back to his life as a tramp. He goes back to help Pinocchio get out of the cage. He doesn't succeed, but the fact he went back shows that Jiminy is responsible. Pinocchio admits he should have listened to Jiminy, and Jiminy admits he shouldn't have left Pinocchio. They both screwed up. When the blue fairy shows up, they are both in trouble. Showing what a good conscience he is, Jiminy tells Pinocchio that he should tell her the truth. Once again, he doesn't listen. And once again, Pinocchio pays for not listening when his nose grows. You gotta respect Jiminy for telling Pinocchio to come clean, even though the truth would have gotten both of them in trouble. Jiminy and the experience for Stromboli left some impact on Pinocchio. When he encountered Honest John for the second time, he tried to do the right thing. It's just that Honest John wouldn't take no for an answer. Some might say that Jiminy should have stuck around instead of running ahead. There are 2 points I'd like to make. 1. Jiminy was racing Pinocchio. He was far ahead and thought Pinocchio was behind him the whole time. 2. Even if Jiminy stuck around, there was nothing he could have done to stop this from happening. Honest John could have easily stomped him. Now for the infamous Pleasure Island scene. Even though he told Jiminy that he was going to be a good boy, Pinocchio misbehaves once he gets to Pleasure Island. Pinocchio's actions earlier with Stromboli could easily be forgiven, since it could have brought in a lot of money for his father, as well as a great career for himself. His behavior on Pleasure Island, not so much. He was destroying property, getting into fights, smoking, and drinking. Once again, some have said this reflects poorly on Jiminy, but I say it doesn't. There are a lot of parents who try to instill morals into their kids. No matter how good the parents are, they can't control their kids' actions once they're around other kids. For better or for worse, kids repeat the actions of their peers. Like a good parent or conscience, Jiminy is angry at Pinocchio over his behavior. He rightfully scolds him. He also yells at Lampwick for encouraging this bad behavior. I'd say Jiminy is once again doing his job. Like before, Jiminy leaves Pinocchio, though I think he's more justified in doing so. Lampwick could have gotten him killed when he hit that ball. Instead of going after him for it, Pinocchio takes Lampwick's side. Jiminy had it with Pinocchio and decides to wash his hands of him. Frankly, I don't blame him. Pinocchio has caused him a lot of trouble, after all. Once he learns what Pinocchio's fate will be, Jiminy quickly gets him out. This action, more than any other, shows how much Jiminy cares about Pinocchio. He could have just walked away without caring what happens to the little wooden boy. After all, it would have been Pinocchio's own fault for not listening. Instead, Jiminy goes back and saves him from a terrible fate. He also doesn't lecture him afterwards. Jiminy must think that seeing Lampwick's transformation and being stuck with donkey ears and a tail is punishment enough for Pinocchio. Overall, I think Jiminy had been a great conscience for Pinocchio. Geppetto may have made him, and the Blue Fairy may have brought him to life. It is Jiminy who taught Pinocchio the difference between right and wrong. Throughout his journey, Pinocchio met a lot of people who didn't have his best interest at heart. Honest John and Gideon, Stromboli, the coachman, and to a lesser extent, Lampwick. No matter how much trouble he he got into, Pinocchio could always count on Jiminy to help him out. In fact, Jiminy consistently tried to keep him out of trouble. The talking cricket in the book mostly just sat on the sideline to lecture Pinocchio. Jiminy, on the other hand, went on the journey with him. Like Pinocchio, he made a lot of mistakes, but he proved himself in the end. I would go as far as to say that Jiminy isn't just Pinocchio's conscience. He's his best friend. So I say he deserves the badge he got in the end. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think. And don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later.